Hey guys, it's Carnifex, another Nerd. This video. This is going to be the first installment in the revitalized, updated, etc. Ability upgrades ranking guide. So for those of you who might be newer, aren't OGs out there, I put out this guide in a video probably like 5 months ago, maybe even more than that. It's been one of the most requested things for me to update because it was only with the original characters released with the game. We didn't have Battlegrounds impending. The meta hadn't changed in ways, that are hard to kind of foresee. And so there was definitely a need to update it. And so this is the first installment. I'm doing this one first because Goblins are going to be used for unlocking Thalanne pretty soon. And people are going to be making some decisions. People who are kind of close to the cut of maybe being able to unlock her at all, maybe get her to 7 stars, but they're crunches with blue scrolls. Or even if they're not trying to push for them, they're just wanting to know, hey, where am I not going wrong as I do this, even if I'm not pushing really hard for at this point. I'm going to be doing this for every faction, and how I'm going to do this at the beginning of every video, I'm going to go in depth on the first character, on why I make the decisions and kind of go over some of the concepts, and then from then thereafter, they'll go a bit quicker. But I will go over every character. So, starting off with the Goblins, just going alphabetically, here's Amara. So we can see they gave her a 2-2-3-2-2. So here are the things that this takes into consideration. Both the cost, for example, someone like an IDL or General Murdoch, say we take a Goblin. General Murdoch can plug and play fine if you're trying to do raids. So you don't necessarily need a whole Goblin faction ready to go in order to make a lot of use from him. His leadership won't matter as much, but the other abilities will all be relevant and really useful. So it will take into consideration whether or not a character kind of only works with a fully put together crew. It will take into consideration, again, the particular individual, if that's a high cost individual to get leveled up, both in gear and in ability scrolls. To get what you need out of them. The benefits, right? So the actual benefits of the individual upgrade, because that's what all these represent. So ability level 2, we're taking ability 1 to ability level 2. What does that upgrade get us for its cost? And then how much does the passive or like leadership, something like that, really contribute to the overall kit? How much synergy is there in creating just a really well put together character? So, and how much does that individual ability upgrade contribute to that synergy? So moving in first, now one of the things to keep in mind with Goblins is that they're going to get to attack under the General Murdoch lead, and I pretty much am assuming you're going to run a General Murdoch lead with these. He's been around a lot. He's earned with the arena meta team right now. A lot of people should have him, should be working on getting him. We'll get him incidentally as a result of building demons. So I am considering the basics a lot whenever I make evaluations here, because that's what those assists are going to be. So you can see initially, I gave it a 2-2-3-2-2. Initially, it's very, very low magic damage bonuses. Now, Amara has crazy high magic damage for, or just physical / magic damage for a Goblin faction. She's one of the highest overall damage characters. So this probably just kind of balances out with that, but it means that you're not getting as much out of this upgrade because she's already got a lot. Now here we get the 20% chance to deal additional damage to a single target. That's in addition to 20% damage increase. So that's why it gets a 3 there. As you can see later on, we get a smaller percentage chance. And we have the same, this is identical here, but it also costs a lot more scrolls. So that's why it gets a lower ranking. But it is nice to eventually get to a point where you have 50% chance to deal damage to an additional target. Going on to her AoE, here we got a 3-3-5-5-4. So what was mediocre about 2 and 3 that got better in 4 and 5? Well, in 2 and 3, we only got some magic damage increases. Now, AoEs tend to get AoE specials tend to get a smaller percentage damage increase for upgrading the ability than single target. So I do kind of separate that. I kind of have like a scale for AoE attacks, and I have a scale for single target damage specials. So initially, you get solid, really, above average damage increases for an AoE. But really what this is about is you got to spread that burning, because right now Amara is not best in slot for a Goblin faction. She does she does not fit. Now, it doesn't mean some of you won't use her to unlock Thalanne, but really her current longer term value until Thanessa is out, the still awaited Thanessa will be one of 2 original characters upon release that we will still not have, and the other one's buff once Thalanne comes out. But eventually Thanessa will come out, we think. But anyway, until then, really her best spot is on a Lake team where she can spread burning, Ember can spread burning, and Lake just drops a big heavy AoE bomb on peeps. And so really she's about spreading that burning. There's not a ton of magic damage going on in the Goblin faction, so that doesn't synergize well with creating extra damage there. So that's why it's about spreading that burning, getting that 100% to spread to all of them, and for her own benefit in her passive, which will in her A3. So reducing the initial cooldown by 1, also really good. Not quite as good as being able to spread, burning 100% of the time, but good. Now this eventually stacks up to a pretty significant damage whenever you consider like 5 on here. So that's 640 magic damage. That's pretty solid. That's nothing to sneeze at. But initially we get some better value versus later on. You see the first ones are 5s. So here and here, this is, for 7 green scrolls, something like that. That's a really great value whenever at the end you're getting like, oh, I mean, I'm getting a little more, but gosh. So don't see this as 5%. See this as like 5 times 5, right? So like 25% extra magic damage for each one. And then, as you can see, we get a very reasonable increase, and then it stays stagnant, and then we get a little something, then it gets a little stagnant again. So it's a little bit dicey, but overall, I felt like it kind of kept track with itself at the end. Really solid A3 there, really good synergy with her overall kit. Now, eventually when we get Thanessa, right, this will have increased value, and I even reflect that in here to boost the upgrade value if Thanessa is in play because of what it grants. How their synergies work. But anywho, this will allow Amara to generate a ton of turn meter for herself and eventually for Thanessa. Basically, it's just how much does it cost versus how much do we get. So you can see 2 and 4 are kind of our best areas of value here. And other than that, it's, not as good, and particularly ability level 6 being the same with much more cost. So anyway, I think you kind of get what I'm throwing at you right now. So we're gonna go right into Adam. So generally, we can see on Adam that he's got some pretty much lamer value early on. It's not really until you build out his entire, until you upgrade an ability pretty close to full to 5 or 6, where you really start to see the value for your investment. Until then, it's kind of just wasted scrolls, really, with the exception of ability level 3 here, and I'll show you that in a sec. So here, his damage is pathetic. Look at this. This is a gear 11. This is my personal gear 11. Adam, it's bad. It's bad. This is about doing the damage decrease 40%. Doesn't sound a lot, but it is an AoE, and it applies for 2 turns. So that's 2 out of 5 every time he does it on average. Now, obviously, those are going to overlap sometimes. You're going to reapply to someone, but that's not a bad thing either. So a little bit of RNG there on how good it is. Again, early on, we're getting physical damage on someone who has crap physical damage. Exciting, right? But eventually we increase the chance of that armor decrease going out to the point to where we get it to apply for 2 turns 100% of the time unless it's resisted or ignored. Because they're immune. When I say ignored, it's because they're immune. Now this is the one where we got a little higher value. It's because this is a pretty flat rate, so I'll use these words kind of a lot. The damage, or in this case shield scaling, is not very good. It's flat. It stays pretty much the same until we get to level 6. So here, right, it's getting you the same thing as here, but it's a lot cheaper. So it's going to be a better value. That's why we gave that here, get a 3 here, because it's still really not that much, but eventually it's like, it's really not that much shield. It is based off max health, which is the reason why I do use a couple health sets there, in just addition to giving him more health. So eventually he can heal for about, do math real quick, like 16k shields-ish. That's not bad, but you start off getting like 4k, and then you have to pay a lot just to go up those 12. And I never use this on turn 1. I always end up using this to try and get on someone, so it's not using it until turn 3 anyway, and at that point, turn 2 at a minimum, and then after that, you might not get another use on it. It's a tank, so considering it's 1 use essentially, or it's a match that you had so handily that they didn't kill your tank. Taunt chance earlier on, not so great, but eventually we do get a little better value out of it. And eventually, if you don't have Instructor Gorham, you really need to prioritize maxing this. In my testing of the event, if you're not going to have Instructor Gorham, you want to have that maxed. Very important. Alrighty, moving on to our next character. Alright, we got Dr. Frank. Pretty good overall. Got a little bit of lackluster, and this does not mean that this ability is bad. It is simply looking at the value of the upgrade that we're getting. There's some great abilities that just frankly, like, the upgrades don't add much to it because it's already great. They didn't want to make it too crazy. So moving on, why is Mr. Frank's well, initially doesn't give any additional chance to inflict shock, and that's what this is all about. Spreading that daze around, doesn't give us anything. He does some damage. It's not terrible, but you know, this is mostly about spreading the shock around. Now, here's the nice thing: if it's a shocked enemy, all he has to do is hit him to apply daze. But it also means he's not going to reapply shock and allow that to perpetuate, as well as trigger his passive. So you want the shock for his passive as well. So this is not devoid of value just because you don't need it. And he's going to apply shock on everyone unless it's resisted or ignored from his AoE. So, you know, it's not as essential to boost it up a lot, but it is still a good, it's a solid value once you're actually getting the shock out of it. So ability 2, we already saw it. It's basically just how's the damage scale, right? 30% for an AoE is not bad at all. 40 is not bad, 40, 50, 50. So it's just basically an assessment of value, just damage. Same thing here. The shield scaling is pretty solid, but because shield is so rare to be able to regenerate, and because, remember with this, it's not just assessing the amount of shield that's being restored, it's potentially also the amount of health, because the health restored is equivalent to 50% of the restored shield. So this is going to potentially restore 175% of Frank's magic damage as health, versus before it's like, oh gosh, well that's not nearly as much, right? So it's not just shield. Keep that in mind as you're doing it. But at the same time, we do see some dips in the scaling, and so that, you know, matters more and less. I could have easily gone 5 here, or I did go 5. I was looking at the wrong line. Yes, so 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. Here we got a couple 3s. What's going on there? It's just because we have a 10% chance. It's a really, cheap upgrade, but it doesn't give us much. It doesn't scale very well, and then it jumps up. And of course, here is where we get the addition to where if the attacker called when someone attacks shock is Dr. Frank, and you get 2 more random goblins called to assist. All of them have that chance to generate the additional assist whenever instructor or whenever General Murdoch's in the lead. So much synergy there with the Goblin faction. Very, very valuable to get to ability level 6. So who is next? We have the General Murdoch, first in command, first in charge. That's a joke about Major Shott. He's got a where is it? Oh no, it's on some event where it's like he's like first in charge or whatever, second in charge instead of like second in command. I love all the little silly. Anyway, going in, I'm not trying to have too much chitter chatter that's not relevant what we're talking about. So initially, decent. Yeah, what's going on? Well, we're getting a good quality percentage boost, but we're not getting any damage increase, and we continue to get damage increase while getting pretty good scaling on the damage increases that we're getting for each upgrade. So that's why that's really valuable. Going into here, again, 40%, really solid. Not crazy, but really solid initially. And then eventually we get higher percent term year increase, and the damage scaling is pretty reasonable. Going into the AoE, initially, again, we're not getting any chance to boost our slow, but it is still a pretty high percentage for an AoE. So we got that going for us, and the damage scaling is but we do get increasingly better scaling of the slow rate of application. So that's where you get that. Now here, the wording's a little funky here. What this means at max is he gets 30% potency for order, and then obviously because they're all order, an additional 30% if members of the enemy that are elves as well. So it's kind of like for each tag, he gets 30% more potency. Now, he doesn't have crazy high potency. He's got like low 20s base potency at gear 11. And you want to run him with a speed set and not like with a ton of potency sets or something like that. So this is helpful, but because it's flat gains, right, we're going to see eventually this is pretty relatively low value. It's 5% for each the whole time. So that's kind of the one weak part where it's not necessarily as big of a deal to invest. And do remember for raids, the raid bosses do not have tags like that. So it's not going to help you against Soleus for those who might be mistaken in understanding that. Now here it's a 5-4-5-4-4. This is obviously the best value one out of the whole kit and caboodle, but 5% turn meter. When you consider how many assists this is not like a one-time thing. It's so many assists giving that 5% turn meter. So that's why that's worth so much more. And I know that this may seem like, man, all I'm doing is increasing it by 10%. As someone who had this at 4 before he tried doing the Thalanne event, I really saw a significant difference having it go from 30 to 50. It's almost twice as frequently you're going to get assists. So I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an assist. It's not even like a little extra damage. It's a full-on extra assist that applies a debuff most of the time. It's one of the weaknesses with Amara's kit is that her basic does not apply a debuff, even though it does have the multi-hit potential. So we're going to Instructor Gorham. We love the A1, the ability 1, the basic upgrades, but we're not massive fans of the other. It doesn't mean that they're terrible abilities. It just means that what we get out of the upgrades is not so great. So we're going to go into Instructor Gorham. This is really solid basic damage scaling in addition to calling Adam to assist more frequently. Again, more times to make sure we're getting everybody on that damage decrease, reapplying it. They're never letting it wear off unless there's the Dispeller somewhere. And finally, if the hit is critical, Adam gains taunt for 1 turn. So crucial for a character who doesn't have an actual guaranteed taunt ability. Now here we had a little funkiness where we had a decent value early on and later on. So more value comes from you don't get a ton of damage out of these guys. What you want them to do is you want them to live. You want them to, particularly on the dragon, you want them to do their little dink dink dink, back and forth with each other. And you want them to live to the point to where they can apply stun or daze on enemies. So that's why you want that. So you want them to live. That's the main thing. They're not going to ever do a ton of damage. They're there to knock stuff off. So not a ton. Now this is overall a solid ability, and it works well with his A3, which requires the piggies and reduces their cooldowns. But overall, the upgrades aren't that valuable. Here we got a bunch of mediocre stuff. Just increases damage, some damage scaling, not crazy, but you do have an increased chance, eventually guaranteed, restoring an ability to an allied half-big henchman. It's really hard to justify putting attacks on a allied on the half-big henchman. If they get that AoE stun off, AoE days off, that can potentially really debilitate the enemy. So that is not to be ignored. And finally here, this is where we see a little now you do want to run him full crit chance as much as you can. I even have the primary here as crit chance because of that ability to have Adam taunt. And because he's a support-ish damagey dealer. It's certainly not like a bad idea to run it on him. But at the same time, boosting his crit damage by 5% for a level 3 upgrade is really only that great. More crit damage for every half-pig henchman is really not that many times outside of raid scenarios where you get more than 2. So you really can read this as, 2%. It's like, oh, when you put it that way, that's not that great. At max, right? So overall, it's just not a great ability, even though it does synergize well with the fact that you want to run it with crit chance, both for the General Murdoch lead and for the chance to have Adam taunt. Moving on. Major Shott. What am I known keeps me going. I'm full of references. If this is your first video, I apologize. Now, Major Shott, I've had some bones to pick with Major Shott in the past. He is probably currently best in slot. Goblin, not in the leadership slot, but overall what he has, and I would say for the event, based on what it currently looks like, obviously can be changed. I would definitely say he's going to be a valuable member of your team. This is not why. This is not. it's not the scale, it's not the amount of damage he does with this, although obviously it's great for him to go from 70% to, you know, initial target to 220 and from 20 to all other enemies to 60. That's not a bad thing. But if you look at his physical damage, it is freaking weak sauce. Is weak sauce. They had to make it that way because he's all AoEs, but you know, it's weak sauce. So that's why we're not getting a lot out of those. Going into here, now for those who don't know how this works, basically he has to use this a second time before he's going to get this chance to stun enemies. Otherwise, this would be considered a lot more valuable and pertinent. But whenever you're stunning people half as frequently, it's not as big of a deal. Otherwise, these would definitely both be 5s. Moving on to the A3. So we do see a little dip on the ability level 5 increase, and I'll show you why. Because look, it's all the initial cooldown by 1. That's not very much. Even when you consider it's passive, this is really not that much. Putting down healing block is good. We're really doing this for the blindness. That's more often than not the benefit you get whenever you're doing anything outside of arena or battlegrounds. Sometimes with arena and battlegrounds, the healing block is helpful, but there are some comps where they don't even have a proper healer on there. So, you know, really we want to try and reduce these cooldowns. We want to add the healing block. It's certainly not a bad thing to add. But again, we're not really getting any 5s in here because the cooldown is just so crazy. It's going to take a while. Now going in here, getting to the point, you know, initially, right, you have 20% chance, it goes to 50, and then the last 2, it goes to a full. So that's why we see more value here, because it's 10, 10, 10, so flat, right, so reducing value, and then we get it doubled and tripled off of what we've been having so far. So much better value later on. And then ability level 5, this is his leadership. Consider we're not going to be using it, but I'm still kind of going to give it an evaluation. Ability level 4 is definitely kind of the minimum you want to go for, but if you really want to go all that way, you just love, you know, that chance to reduce enemy cooldowns, go for it. And extra damage on the goblins certainly doesn't hurt anybody, but there definitely seems to be more synergy with applying all these debuffs on their basics. Next, after Major Shott Kala, we have all of the factions have a red avoid. At least so far, I'm not done doing this. So as you look at all these, only the ones that some of them are not going to be updated yet, but I am going to post this in the description. Old lore. Even with kind of the possibility of him looking a little better synergizing with Frank, because Frank's going to be spreading around all the days in addition to him. You'll see with his basic, he has some synergy there with his, it's overall, like, there's no way you're taking Shott out. There's no way you're taking Frank out. There's no way you're taking Adam, General Murdoch, or Instructor Gorham out, period. There's no scenario. There's at least scenarios where you would put Pigwald in. There's at least scenarios where you would use Amara with Vanessa eventually. Lore is bad. Lore is bad. I don't think even Danger X likes Old Lore. So here's what it is. Basically, get it to here if you really want to use him. This scaling is not bad, but is dependent on the enemy being dazed. It does line up well with his kit because you'll use his A3 on turn 1, his ability that applies daze on turn 2, and then you'll be able to basic out people. It's really just, early on he was kind of useful to daze Tromgar so that he wouldn't counterattack you, but that was really it. So here, get it to ability level 4 where it can do the daze. Remember that since it's a multi-attack, each one of these is going to apply 3 times, so it's not bad damage scaling once you hit level 4. But overall, again, it's just a really rough kit. Here you get the potency increase. That's not nothing whenever you're trying to apply a debuff, right? And accuracy. That's not a terrible thing either, because if he misses even one of them, he's not going to apply that daze. So those are kind of your 2 points of kind of any real value here, but other than that, a little extra turn meter is not going to make Old Lore worth something. And then going in here completely flat, so again, just reduced value, and because this would be a little higher if he was actually like a usable character. If they have red, everything's going to be basically like a full point lower than it would have been otherwise. Moving on, we don't want to spend too much time on Old Lure. We're going to go to Sergeant Pigwald. You'll see him might have little notes here, like raid with goblins, just little considerations there. There's not going to be a ton. You get less out of the benefit of Sergeant Pigwald's basic, being able to do more damage to the targets below 50% health in like arena battleground scenarios. One, if they're under 50% health, he might have killed them without the boosted damage. You know, there's a chance that the percentage of times where he's going to assist in a scenario where that's relevant and it's going to make a difference, he's going to kill someone whenever he wouldn't have. It's really just not that frequent. But in raids, this is super, super helpful. Once you've dropped him below 50%, he's going to hit 60%, you know, with an additional 60% damage. That is not nada. It's not nada. And again, just, you know, it's basically just the scaling is really solid throughout. That's why he gets good scores. Now, this initially is a little kind of like, really, do I want to use this? It's still worth using mathematically. By the time you get it here, you give up one turn, sure, but you get triple damage for 2 turns following it. Really, really nice to set up with this rocket strike if it makes sense. In order to maximize the damage that way, getting around taunts, and also potentially getting that instant cooldown if you have it boosted. Speak of the devil. We got a little bit of funkiness earlier on, but later we get the boost. Just 20%. Remember, it's only 2 damage to its AoE, which is a 2 target, but it is targeting the people with the lowest health, possibly the ones we've been trying to hit and get down close enough so whenever the tank taunts or an invisibility is put out, that this is able to finish them off. So reasonable damage scaling, but then at the end here, instant cooldown as the ability kills an enemy. This can be hard to synergize, and you may or may not be able to get this work the first time around. Usually where you get a higher chance of this working is whenever you're able to come around, prep, lock, and load, so that's able to work with it in succession. Now this, I mean, pretty much, there are some cases where I could see someone using a Pigwald as kind of like a wild card, you know, with some other team without goblins, but he really does get the most out of just cranking out physical damage for the goblin party. Best physical damage dealer by far in the entire goblin faction. So a lot of extra synergy here, 55% with the goblin faction. So initially we're going to see it not, you know, it gets flat, right, and then we get with goblins, and you're pretty much always going to run them with goblins. So finally, Thanessa. I'm not going to go too much into Thanessa here because we still don't have her. And so I made a couple minor adjustments just based on like meta relevance and such, but not great damage scaling, but the chance to apply that poison and then eventually 2 poison stacks. Remember all the synergy with Amara, all that damage that's going to be going out. This is a really great ability. I could have put this a little higher, but everything else being at 30%, it's like, gosh, you know, I could have put that one out of 4. It wouldn't be wrong to put it out of 4. Here, strongest single target healing ability in the game, plus giving the debuff immunity for 2 turns. However, this is going to be overkill for pretty much everyone. You know, at some point diminishing returns, because how often is that, are you actually going to get that 900% out? We'll see when we get her, right? Magic damage, right, on her, her and Amara are like the 2 magic damage dealers out of the entire faction currently, other than Dr. Frank. So calls 2 random allies to assist. Other than that, we get not great scaling damage, but eventually we get an additional ally to join the attack. And whenever you consider the synergy with General Murdoch, that's definitely somewhere you would eventually want to be. Finally, going on to the passive, it's flat initially and then scales pretty hard relative to itself. And remember that this is increases magic damage for every living goblin, right? So this isn't 1, it's 5, 5, 5, 10, 15. And if Amara's on the battlefield, she gets the same buff. So it boosts these values by 1 if used with Amara for sure. So anyway, that's the Goblin faction. I hope this helps out you guys who are looking how to best invest your goblins as you go through. I tested using a team of General Murdoch, Sergeant Pigwald. It's basically the OG 5 with General Murdoch instead of Old Lore. Because gosh, if you somehow had the ability to get everyone to gear 11 without having General Murdoch, I don't even understand. I don't even understand how you're building stuff right now. So for General Murdoch and then all the OG 4, you definitely want to care about the AoE damage. So like boosting this to level 5 is not a bad idea at all. Boosting this to level 6, not a bad idea at all. You definitely, if you don't have Instructor Gorm, you want to have this max. So a little extra tips for those of you who actually watched it. Anywho, I hope you guys got a lot of value of this, and look for more of these videos in the future.